When I first moved into this neighborhood, I thought I was stepping into a new chapter of peace, maybe even suburban bliss. A fresh start, a quiet life, a chance to just exist without the weight of constant battles. But life has a way of laughing at expectations, and mine crumbled the moment I met Karen. Karen, the self-appointed ruler of this little community, a woman who walked the streets like she was a monarch surveying her kingdom. At first, I assumed she was just another nosy neighbor, the kind who peeked through blinds and gossiped about trash placements. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. Karen wasn't just nosy. She was a tyrant with an iron grip over the HOA, a woman who thrived on controlling every inch of the neighborhood with her endless rules and regulations. And the worst part? She had decided, from the very moment I set foot here, that I didn't belong. It started small, like a snake slithering through grass, just subtle enough to make you doubt whether you were imagining things. A note on my door about my lawn being half an inch too tall. A warning about my trash bins being positioned at the wrong angle. A condescending smile every time she handed me a letter, acting as if she was doing me a favor by enforcing rules that seemed to shift whenever she pleased. I humored it at first, trimmed the lawn, adjusted the bins, played the game just to keep the peace. But peace was never what Karen wanted. No, she wanted submission, obedience, a neighborhood full of people too afraid to question her authority. And I had unknowingly become her biggest threat simply by existing outside of her control. Then came the letter that changed everything. An envelope, crisp and official, stamped with the HOA logo, slipped into my mailbox like a wolf in sheep's clothing. I expected another fine, another absurd complaint about my porch light being too bright or my car not being parked at a perfect 90-degree angle. But when I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. An eviction notice. An actual, legally worded demand that I vacate my home within 30 days due to multiple infractions and failure to uphold the aesthetic values of the community. I read it once, then twice, my heart pounding harder with each word. It wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. And at the bottom of the page, signed in Karen's usual sharp, superior handwriting, was the confirmation that she had officially declared war. I laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that echoed through my empty house. Eviction? She thought she could evict me from a house I owned outright? The sheer arrogance was almost admirable. Almost. And then, just as I was about to toss the letter into the trash, my eyes caught the final line. A single sentence that sent a chill down my spine. Failure to comply may result in foreclosure proceedings. My fingers tightened around the paper, my pulse slowing as the realization sank in. This wasn't just bluster. This was a real, calculated move. Karen had done her homework, had dug deep into the gray areas of HOA power abuse, and had found a loophole that, in theory, could make my life a legal nightmare. Some HOAs had been known to pull it off before, stacking up fines, forcing homeowners into financial corners until they had no choice but to leave. The thought sent a slow, simmering anger through me. She thought she could push me out, make me fold, make me run. But Karen had made a fatal mistake. Because in all her self-righteous fury, she had overlooked one crucial fact. She wasn't just the HOA president. She wasn't just my overbearing neighbor. She was my tenant. The laugh that escaped me this time wasn't short or disbelieving. It was low, slow, the kind of laughter that comes when you realize you hold all the cards in a game you didn't even know you were playing. Karen, the woman trying to evict me, was living in a house I had bought as an investment property years ago. She had been renting from a faceless landlord, never realizing that landlord was me. I turned to my computer, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I pulled up my property management files. And there it was, as clear as day. The lease agreement, signed and dated, with my name at the top. Karen wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was a tenant in violation of her lease, a tenant who had just given me every legal reason to remove her from my property. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly as the reality of the situation settled in. This wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. This wasn't just a petty feud between a power-hungry woman and a homeowner who refused to bow. This was war, and Karen had unknowingly handed me the ultimate weapon. The irony was almost poetic. She had spent months trying to make my life miserable, only to find herself standing on ground that wasn't even hers to begin with. I tapped my fingers against my desk, considering my next move. An email? No, too impersonal. A legal notice slipped under her door? No, too easy. No, this called for something better. This called for a confrontation, a moment where I could watch the realization dawn in her eyes, where I could see the moment her world came crashing down. If she wanted a battle, I was more than happy to bring the fight to her doorstep. I stood, grabbed the lease agreement, and headed for the door, already picturing the way Karen's smug expression would shatter the moment she realized what she had done. The air outside was crisp, the sun casting long shadows over the perfectly manicured lawns Karen had spent years obsessing over. And there she was, standing in her yard, berating another poor neighbor about their flower beds not meeting HOA regulations. She turned when she saw me approaching, her expression shifting into the all-too-familiar smirk, the kind of look that said she thought she had already won. "I assume you got the notice," she said, crossing her arms, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's nothing personal, but the HOA has made its decision. You don't fit the community standards, and we can't have that." I took a deep breath, savoring the moment, feeling the weight of the lease agreement in my hand like a weapon I was about to unleash. "Oh, I got the notice," I said, my lips curving into a slow, knowing smile. "And I have a response." Her smirk faltered. I reached into my folder and pulled out the termination of lease agreement. And for the first time since I moved into this neighborhood, Karen didn't look so sure of herself. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating, as Karen's eyes darted down to the papers in my hand. Her smug expression flickered, just for a second, just long enough for me to know she felt it. That first whisper of doubt, of fear, of something being horribly, terribly wrong. She was waiting for me to blink, to fold, to crumble under the weight of the authority she believed she held over me. But the problem with people like Karen was that they always assumed they were the smartest person in the room. And that was the exact reason they never saw the fall coming until it was far, far too late. I extended the papers to her, watching as she hesitated before snatching them from my grasp. Her fingers tightened around the pages, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the slow, agonizing realization sinking in. Her lips parted, the color draining from her face, her hands trembling just slightly. I had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who had spent years believing they were untouchable, only to realize they were standing on a foundation of sand. This is a joke, right?" she stammered, forcing a laugh, though it came out strangled, unnatural. "You can't do this. You don't have the authority." "Oh, but I do." I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough to make sure she had to listen. "You see, Karen, the house you're standing in? The one you so proudly rule over? It's mine. I've owned it for years. And you? You're just a tenant. A tenant who has violated nearly every clause in her lease agreement. A tenant who is now officially evicted." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She clutched the eviction notice as if she could somehow crush it out of existence, her fingers crumpling the edges. "You're bluffing," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "You can't just—" "I can." I tilted my head slightly, watching the panic flicker through her eyes. "And I already have." She took a step back, her entire body stiffening, her fight-or-flight instincts battling each other. But Karen wasn't the type to run. No, people like her never admitted defeat. They didn't surrender. They doubled down, convinced that if they just pushed hard enough, screamed loud enough, the universe would bend to their will. And that was exactly what she did. "This is illegal," she shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "You're retaliating against me. The HOA will never allow this. I'll take this to the board. I exhaled slowly, already bored with the performance. "Karen," I interrupted, my tone exasperated. "The HOA doesn't own this house. You don't own this house. I do. And landlord-tenant laws trump HOA regulations every single time. You're out of moves." She flinched as if I had slapped her, her breathing shallow, erratic. I could see it now, the full weight of the situation pressing down on her, cracking through the indestructible facade she had so carefully crafted. But Karen wasn't ready to give up. "Not yet. You think you can just evict me?" she hissed, straightening her posture, her chin lifting with forced defiance. "I have rights. You can't just kick someone out because you don't like them." "This isn't personal," I replied, though let's be honest, it absolutely was. "You broke the terms of your lease. Repeatedly. Harassing other residents? Check. Unauthorized modifications to the property? Check. Attempting to manipulate an HOA into illegally evicting your own landlord." I let out a dry chuckle. "Oh, that's a big check." She was shaking now, her hands tightening into fists. I could see the rage bubbling under her skin, threatening to explode. But she wasn't going to lash out. Not yet. No, Karen had another plan. I could practically see it forming in her mind, the wheels spinning, grasping for some last-minute lifeline. And then, as if on cue, she straightened her back and smiled. It was eerie, calculated, a predator adapting to a new battlefield. "Well," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with forced politeness, "I guess we'll just have to see what the HOA has to say about all this." I sighed, already knowing where this was going. "Karen." "Oh, don't worry," she interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "I won't bother you with the details. I'll just let the HOA handle it. After all, they have very strict policies against landlords trying to harass tenants." And just like that, she turned on her heel and stormed off, disappearing into her house. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door, waiting to see if she'd pop back out for one last dramatic flourish. But no, she was gone. For now. The next morning, I wasn't even surprised when I opened my inbox to find an email from the HOA. The subject line? Illegal eviction notice, violation of HOA bylaws. I clicked it open, already rolling my eyes. "Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you have engaged in unauthorized eviction proceedings against a resident of our community. The HOA has strict rules against retaliatory actions and unlawful displacement of residents. Any attempts to remove a member of this community without due process will result in immediate fines and further legal action. Please consider this your official warning. Sincerely, HOA Compliance Team." I stared at the email for a second, then let out a slow chuckle. Oh, this was rich. Karen had actually managed to weaponize the HOA against me, as if their rules could somehow override state law. As if they could actually stop me from evicting a tenant who had blatantly violated her lease. Fine. If Karen wanted a war, I'd give her one. I cracked my knuckles, then typed out my response. "Dear HOA Compliance Team, thank you for your message. I appreciate your concern regarding unlawful evictions. However, Karen is not a resident of the community in the sense you describe. She is my tenant. As the legal owner of her property, I have the right to terminate her lease for cause, which I have already done in accordance with state and federal housing laws. My decision is not subject to HOA oversight. Furthermore, any attempts by the HOA to interfere with lawful landlord-tenant matters could be considered harassment, for which I am prepared to take legal action if necessary. Best regards, your favorite landlord." I hit send and leaned back in my chair, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Karen could try to fight this all she wanted, but the law was on my side. She had no power here, no authority to twist things in her favor. She was scrambling, desperate, clinging to whatever weak excuse she could find. But what she didn't realize was that she had already lost. And now it was just a matter of watching her finally, truly unravel. Karen wasn't just the kind of person who refused to admit defeat. She was the kind who, even when backed into a corner, would claw and bite and do everything in her power to drag you down with her. I had seen her type before. People like her thrived on control, on bending the world to their will. And when that power was stripped away, when they were forced to face the consequences of their actions, they didn't just take the loss. No, they tried to set the whole damn house on fire on their way out. The first sign that she wasn't going to leave quietly came the next morning when I opened my door to find my mailbox stuffed to the brim. Not with the usual junk mail, not with bills, but with official-looking letters, each one stamped with the HOA logo. I pulled them out, flipping through them, and by the time I was done, I had counted 12 separate violations. 12. My trash bin placement was suddenly a safety hazard. My front door color was deemed inconsistent with community aesthetics. My garden, a patch of grass and exactly one shrub, was apparently an unacceptable deviation from approved landscaping standards. The list went on, each violation more absurd than the last. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. So this was her game now. A last-ditch effort to drown me in paperwork, to bury me under fines and bureaucratic nonsense until I gave up and let her stay. I chuckled under my breath, rubbing a hand over my face. "Oh, Karen, you really thought this was going to work?" I gathered the letters and tossed them onto my kitchen counter before heading straight to my laptop. 5 minutes later, I had a response typed up and ready to go. A single email addressed to the HOA board, outlining every single instance of Karen's abuse of power, complete with documented evidence. Photos, timestamps, copies of previous emails, all wrapped up in a nice, neat digital package. I ended it with a polite but very firm reminder that harassment of homeowners, especially from someone who was no longer a legal resident, was grounds for legal action. Then I hit send and leaned back, waiting. It didn't take long. By noon, I received a reply. Short. Straight to the point. The HOA is currently reviewing this matter and will take appropriate action. Please disregard any incorrect notices received in error. Asterisk asterisk. I smirked. That's what I thought. But if I had assumed that Karen was done, that she would take the hint and start packing, I was very, very wrong. Because the next day, the cops showed up. I was in the middle of my morning coffee when I heard the knock at my door, firm and official. When I opened it, 2 uniformed officers stood on my porch, their expressions neutral but professional. Sir, we need to speak with you regarding a complaint, one of them said. I let out a slow sigh, already knowing exactly where this was going. Let me guess, I said, rubbing my temple. Karen called you. The officers exchanged a glance before one of them nodded. She claims you're attempting an unlawful eviction and that you've been harassing her, he said. We're just here to get your side of the story. I let out a dry laugh, stepping aside. Come on in, officers, I said. I've got plenty to show you. I walked them through everything. The lease agreement, the eviction notice, the HOA nonsense, the endless violations she had tried to slap on me. I even pulled up the email exchange with the HOA board, showing them that even they were washing their hands of her mess. The officers took their time, reading through everything carefully. By the time they were done, one of them let out a low whistle, shaking his head. This is completely legal, he muttered to his partner. She's got no case. The other officer nodded before turning back to me. Sorry about this, sir, he said. Unfortunately, this kind of thing happens a lot. Some people don't understand that HOA rules don't override actual property laws. I let out a humorless chuckle. Oh, trust me, I said. I'm getting that impression. They left soon after, but not before making a stop at Karen's house. I didn't hear the full conversation, but I caught the tail end of it as one officer firmly told her. Ma'am, this is a civil issue, not a police matter. Don't call us again unless there's an actual emergency. The first crack in Karen's armor. But she still wasn't done. Because the next thing she did? She tried to stall the eviction. By filing a bogus legal complaint against me. 2 days later, I received a notice from the local housing authority, informing me that a dispute had been filed regarding tenant harassment and wrongful eviction. The claim? That I had forged her lease termination, that I was engaging in predatory landlord behavior, and that I was trying to remove her without proper cause. I had to laugh. Really. I actually laughed out loud. Karen had no case. None. And I could prove it. I drafted my response within the hour, attaching copies of every single document proving she was in violation of her lease. I highlighted key points, cited local landlord-tenant laws, and even included the police report showing that she had tried **** and failed **** to get the authorities on her side. Then, just for good measure, I attached a final letter. A formal legal notice giving her exactly 30 days to vacate before I proceeded with court-ordered eviction. And once that paperwork was in motion, there was no stopping it. I sent it all off, then sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Karen could throw whatever tantrum she wanted. She could call the cops, send fake complaints, try to drag me through HOA hell. But it didn't matter, because the countdown had officially begun. 30 days. She had 30 days left in this house. And I already knew, ***, she wasn't going to go quietly. ***. Eviction day had arrived. 30 days. That was how long Karen had fought, clawed, and schemed to try and avoid the inevitable. 30 days of desperate emails to the HOA, of fake legal filings, of playing the victim to anyone who would listen. But none of it had worked. The countdown had hit 0, and now there was nothing left but the final scene. The moment where reality would finally crush down on her like a collapsing house of cards. I stood across the street, arms crossed, watching as the sheriff's department pulled up in front of my house. ***, the house Karen no longer had a right to live in ***. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, clipboard in hand, and walked up to her door. I could already hear the muffled shouting from inside, the telltale signs of a woman scrambling for any last excuse, any last lifeline she could grab before being dragged under. When she finally yanked the door open, her face was red. Whether from anger, stress, or sheer humiliation, I wasn't sure. Probably all 3. She still wasn't packed. Not a single moving box in sight. I had half expected this. The same way some people refused to accept the seasons changing, Karen had refused to believe that this day would ever come. "Ma'am," one of the officers started, his voice calm but firm. "We're here to execute a court-ordered eviction. You have 15 minutes to vacate the premises. Any belongings left behind will be removed by a cleanup crew." Karen's jaw clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might crack. "This is my home," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. He can't do this. This is illegal. He's been harassing me, manipulating the system. This is a violation of my tenant rights." The officer didn't even flinch. "No, ma'am. This is his home. You were given proper notice. You failed to vacate. Now you are trespassing on private property. If you do not comply, we will have no choice but to place you under arrest." That got her attention. For the first time, Karen hesitated. She knew she had lost, that there were no more loopholes, no more tricks, no more last-minute rescues. But even in this moment, even at the edge of total defeat, she still couldn't let go of her pride. She turned to me, eyes burning with pure, unfiltered rage. "You don't have to do this," she hissed. "We can work something out. I'll drop the HOA complaints. I'll. I tilted my head, watching her scramble. "Oh, now you want to negotiate?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "After trying to get me kicked out of my own home? After the police calls, the fake violations, the legal threats?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She had nothing. "No, Karen," I said, shaking my head. "You made your bed. Time to lie in it." Her face crumpled in disbelief, her pride shattering right in front of me. She stomped back inside, and for a moment, I thought she was actually going to comply. But then, crash. The sound of something shattering echoed from inside. One of the officers stiffened. "Ma'am, step away from the property," he ordered, moving toward the doorway. Karen had lost it. She was knocking things over, yanking open drawers, destroying the very house she had spent years policing everyone else over. A picture frame flew across the room. A chair was kicked over. She slammed a cabinet door so hard that it nearly broke off the hinge. I sighed, watching from a distance. "Wow," I muttered. "She's really going out like this, huh?" The officer turned to me. "Would you like to press charges for property damage?" I considered it. Oh, it was tempting. But no, this was already over. "Not unless she breaks something major," I said. "I just want her out." 15 minutes later, she was. Karen stomped down the steps of my house. My house. Dragging a single overstuffed suitcase behind her. Her face was blotchy, her shoulders stiff, but she refused to look at me. She was humiliated, broken. For the first time in her life, she had played a game of power and lost. She opened her mouth, as if she had one last thing to say, one final insult to throw my way, but nothing came. Because there was nothing left to say. She turned, climbed into her car, and sped off without another word. And just like that, Karen was gone. The officers secured the house, changed the locks, and had me sign the final paperwork. When they left, I stood there for a long moment, taking in the peaceful silence. No more ridiculous HOA fines. No more fake police complaints. No more Karen. For the first time since I moved into this neighborhood, I could breathe. Then the next morning, I got an email from the HOA. "Dear homeowner, due to recent vacancies, there is now an open seat on the HOA board. As a valued member of the community, we would like to extend an invitation for you to apply." I stared at the email for a long moment. Then I laughed. Loud. Karen was gone, the neighborhood was finally quiet, and now they wanted me to take her place? Yeah, that was never happening. I closed the email and went about my day, knowing full well that wherever Karen was, she was miserable. And honestly, that was more than enough for me. What would you have done if you were in the protagonist's shoes? Would you have handled it differently? Have you ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA or a neighbor from hell? What's the worst HOA experience you've had? At what point do you think Karen realized she had lost? Do you think she ever truly believed she would be evicted? Do you think the protagonist should have pressed charges for property damage? Or was letting Karen walk away punishment enough? If you suddenly found out you were your nightmare neighbor's landlord, what's the first thing you would do?